I think we're ready to go. So, my name is Chris Thompson. I am a professor of neuroscience at the School of Neuroscience in Virginia Tech. And so I teach neuroscience, and let's transition that. My research focuses mostly on the mechanisms of how hormones shape how brains grow and how they develop. And, so that's mostly of what I focus on, but I'm interested in all kinds of things. And, one thing that I'm particularly interested in is how brains affect how male and female brains grow. It's not something that I specifically study currently, but it is something that I studied as a graduate student. So it's a little bit of something that I know quite a bit about. And there's a lot of misconceptions out there on brains and how male brains differ from female brains and how there are exceptions to that rule. So I thought I would put together a little video of what some of these misconceptions look like. One of the best places to find misconceptions about gender and the identity is Ben Shapiro. So that might be a pretty good place to start. So let's start there. So this is from Ben Shapiro's website, the Daily Wire. You can see he has the Daily Wire has 2.47 million subscribers, and this video in particular has 6.5 million views in just 3 years. 160,000 upvotes. In fact, actually, I'm kind of curious. Let's go to the Daily Wire here.
If there's any...
Ugh, God. Let's look at their most popular video. It's their second most popular video. The first one is Ben Shapiro destroys Don Lemon. That's cool. Oh, on Confederate flags. I might have to watch that at some point. But no, we're going to watch this one, the second most popular video in the Daily Wire, which is Ben Shapiro
people don't have privilege when you basically
destroys
just said that
transgenderism.
trans people aren't valid. They're not a thing. They're just girls pretending to be boys or boys pretending.
Yeah, let's rewind that so we can
How
hear
do you say that some people don't have privilege when you basically just said that trans people aren't valid? They're not a thing. They're just girls pretending to be boys or boys pretending to be girls.
Okay. Oh, someone's excited. Okay.
It's biological, but gender is a completely different thing.
No, gender is not disconnected from sex. So.
It's not completely disconnected, but it's still a cultural thing. It's still from society.
Okay. No, it is not in the mind. Okay, you're not a man if you think you're a man.
So this is the first misconception. Gender is not in the mind. You're not a man if you think you're a man. And so this is where Shapiro is saying that the idea of transgenderism is basically moot because in his mind, biology says that you are a man or if you're a woman, simply based on, mostly he focuses on chromosomal sex. So this is something I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight. But, he's completely wrong on this. Gender really is based in the mind. Gender is a belief. It's a belief structure. And it obviously comes from something. Those beliefs have to come from somewhere. Beliefs come from the brain. And the idea of having some kind of identity is something deeply rooted in the brain, and how males and females act is also deeply rooted in the brain. So this is, a major misconception on Ben Shapiro's part.
And I didn't say pretending, or if I did, I shouldn't have said pretending. Let me amend.
You said playing.
Okay, I said a boy who thinks he's a girl. That's the usual phraseology I use. Not playing. I usually say a boy who thinks he's a girl or a girl who thinks he's a boy, which is technically what we're talking about here. As far as the actual psychological issues at play, it used to be called gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder. Now they call it gender dysphoria. The idea that sex or gender are malleable is not true. Okay, and I'm not denying your humanity if you're a transgender person. I am saying that you are not the sex to which you claim to be. You're still a human being, and you're a human being with an issue that I wish you Godspeed in dealing with in whatever way you see fit. But if you are going to dictate to me that I'm supposed to pretend that men are women and women are men, no. My answer is no. I'm not going to modify basic biology because it threatens your subjective sense of what you are.
He's not going to modify basic biology because of some subjective sense. So this is another super major misconception on this issue. Basic biology is really messy. It isn't as simple as an XY chromosome arrangement means that you are a man, and XX means that you're a woman. In fact, a little bit of the reason why I'm kind of doing this is because ContraPoints, another very popular YouTuber, recently put up a video in response to J.K. Rowling. This video is really great. The whole thing is awesome. It's an hour and a half long, so it's a little long. But there's this little segment here that got me thinking about this old Ben Shapiro clip, and it made me really inspired to say a few things about this. So let's see if I can play this.
Contentious and obviously anti-trans. Sex is real is a euphemism designed to present Maya Forstadter's transphobia as a simple statement of fact, basic common sense, which only crazy activists and ideologues would oppose. Transphobes love to play this game where they pretend that trans people just don't understand basic biology. That's our problem.
Yeah, this is speaking directly to Ben Shapiro on this. Simply just don't understand basic biology, right? Like, clearly people who are transgender or transgender advocates, they've spent a lot of time thinking about what gender means and what sex means. They know what basic biology is going to tell you, and they know it a lot more than Ben Shapiro does. But let's move on.
As if I didn't start taking female hormones because I'm acutely aware that my body is not the same as a cis woman's body.
Right. A transgender woman is going to end up taking female hormones to affect what, right? Affect the body, affect the brain. It does both. And, they're clearly aware that there are some fundamental biological differences between the typical male body and the typical female body. And for one to transition to the other involves having to use some sort of female hormone.
That sex is real. You will never be a woman, Nathan. Every cell in your body is male and has a Y chromosome. Really? That's crazy. How'd you learn so much about science? I don't really feel the need to have a second X chromosome. I get by with one. I make it work. I actually like the Y chromosome. I think it's a little more dainty, It's a little softer, a little more petite. The X chromosome has a lot of extra appendages, don't you think? And I don't need any more of those, thanks. No trans person thinks it's possible to change chromosomal sex, and to pretend otherwise is to argue in bad faith. When we say that someone is a trans man or a trans woman, we're talking about psychological and social identity. So in transphobes...
Right. That's what it comes down to. Psychological and social identity. Now, ContraPoints doesn't want to get into the biology of it, and I understand, because it's just kind of stupid and moot. And it's really arguing from bad faith to say, oh, well, you have to be a man because you have an XY chromosome arrangement, and that clearly it's just something in your head. That argument alone can be defeated on the idea of the morality and the psychology and ethics of having some sort of identity for yourself. At the same time, though, there isn't a good reason to ignore the biological argument. It would be conceding too much to say XY simply means that you're a man and that every single cell in your body has a Y chromosome, therefore you have to be a man. It isn't that simple, and biology can tell us a lot about that. So I got inspired to kind of go back to one of my teaching lectures on sex and the brain, and so I'm going to bring that up. Why don't we do that right now? So this is from my class on neurobiology of sex. So, of course, it's important to define sex, right? So sex is two basic definitions. One is the two main categories, male and female. in which humans most other living organisms are divided based on their reproductive functions. And then sex is also the activity of getting it on, right? Sexual intercourse. So they are interconnected, obviously, and across different species, it actually gets quite complicated on how this is all done. There are some species where there are no males, and we're talking about vertebrates here. And I might even have a whole thing on that. We might just do that, which would be kind of fun, I think, to see what that's like. I got to get my pointer up here. So, but, what I'm going to talk about today is sex and how we define sex. What are sex differences? What is a sex dichotomy? So the idea of a dichotomy is that we have two, right? Male and female, penis, vagina. But when we look at most other sexually different features, we find that there really is a spectrum. And there are certain, say, facial features that generally are associated with males. And there are certain facial features that are more generally associated with females. So if you look at this, these is a computer-generated face here, and you can see the male here, there's like a broader brow ridge, certainly a big, broad chin compared to the far female form, which has a very narrow chin and a really flattened brow ridge and changes in cheekbones and larger eyes, right? You look at this face and most of us would say, yeah, that's a female face, although I could think of some guys that I think that kind of look like that. And you look at this guy, actually, this looks a lot like the New Jersey senator, what's his face? Just escaping me. Ran for president, Cory Booker. Yeah, he kind of looks like Cory Booker a little bit. So Cory Booker's a very male-looking kind of guy, right? So, big, broad chin and broad brow ridge and changes in the cheekbones, not so high, and that kind of thing. But these are computer-generated, right? This is not actually Cory Booker. So we can blend these features. We can alter them and change them. And you look at right in the middle, which is a perfect blend of male and female features. And this looks totally like someone that you may know or have met at some point. And you can look at this face and be like, yeah, I could see that as maybe being a female, and I could maybe see that as maybe being a male, right? This is the thing about sexually different features, is that it is a spectrum. Almost every single thing that we look at, there are only a few exceptions, is going to be along a spectrum of having extreme male examples on one side, extreme female examples on the other side, but any one individual that you're looking at is going to be, on one feature, is going to fall somewhere along that spectrum for just about everything. And then not only that, that's just one feature. There are lots of different features that differ between males and females on average. And so that means all of it can be a mosaic. You could have someone with a particularly feminine looking face, but XY chromosome arrangement, who identifies as male and acts like a male and wants to have sex with females. But they just happen to have certain female facial features. And vice versa, with feminine XX chromosome arrangement, a male looking face, wants to have sex with males, but just happens to have a bit more masculine male features, right? Yeah, right? So any of these things can be along a dimension, and that's the thing about biology, Ben, is that it's quite messy. It's incredibly messy. And that this is the one thing that I've learned about biology, is that when you're in class, and Ben really hasn't graduated from 5th grade biology, as far as I can tell. He learned that XY means male and XX means female, and there's nothing in between, and there are no exceptions to the rule. Biologists know that in biology, there are no laws in biology. There are rules, and there are certain differences that we can quantify and look at, but there are exceptions. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next slide. So certainly there are certain things that seem quite dimorphic. There's a typical male endpoint and a typical female endpoint. Penis and vagina is a good example of that. There's not a whole lot of gray area between that, although, again, there are exceptions to that rule, which is important. But most things, like I said, that's within the sexual mosaic, they fall along with what we would call differences. And so this is a great example of showing what a difference might look like. So this is some feature here. We could say that this is, say, scores on a word-based mental task. Females tend to do better on word-based mental tasks than males. So if you were to do this with 50 males and then 50 females, 50 men and 50 women, right? The women are going to score higher, and then it would be a statistically different. There'd be a statistical difference between the two groups. But the thing is, there are exceptions to the rule. You might find a few males that are just as good, or if not better, than all of the females in the group, and you're going to find a couple of females who are quite a bit more masculine in their word capabilities, and they fall even below the average male. That is common amongst any kind of dimension that has some sort of sex difference. So on average, you're going to find differences, but on the whole, you will see exceptions. There are always going to be exceptions to the rule. And this is true for just about every single sex difference that we look at. Every single one. And that's the important thing here. And then, of course, there are things such as sex divergence, where we see latent sex differences that emerge. So both males and females might be very similar in a certain scenario, but they may be confronted with something, some kind of challenging situation, and that's when you start to see differences between men and women. So that is not uncommon. That is something that can happen and does happen. So in this presentation that I give to my students, I go into like the brain, and we talk about, let me see here, escape. Boop. We talk about the different hormones. We talk about the brain areas that are involved with this. I'm not going to get into too much of this detail because it's a little too much for this presentation. But this is important. All right. Since Ben is so concerned about chromosomes, why don't we talk about chromosomes a little bit? And what does it actually mean? So this is an actual picture of the set of chromosomes from one man's cell. So you can take the chromosomes of a cell and lay them out, and you can do what's called a karyotype. So humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, right? 46 in total. And they are numbered 1 through 22 until you get to the sex chromosomes. And that's where you see some uniqueness between males and females. So a male is going to have an X chromosome, which is nice and big, just like Natalie from ContraPoints was saying. And then they have the dainty little Y chromosome as well. So, but one thing that's special about the Y chromosome is that it has a gene called SRY. So this is the gene that really starts the masculinizing process. So why don't we walk through that a little bit, and we can see how we get to the different endpoints. So one thing about SRY as a gene is that it is a master regulator. It regulates the expression of thousands of other genes. So when SRY is turned on, so you have male cells in the protogonad, the bipotential gonad. It's going to turn on SRY, and that's going to turn on testicular genes. So these genes that promote the differentiation of cells into turning into testes cells. And then they turn off ovarian genes. And then SRY not only does that, it turns on another gene called SOX9. So it recruits SOX9. And so SOX9 gets turned on, and it does the same thing. It turns on other testicular genes and turns off other ovarian genes. So both of these guys, this is almost like, I kind of think of this as like the Avengers, and they're facing, like, this is Captain America here, and he's fending off some bad guys, and he can't handle it all, so he's got to recruit Iron Man, and so Iron Man comes in and turns on SOX9, and so then both of them fight off the ovarian genes and turn on the testicular genes, something stupid like that, right? So it's kind of like that, and then they're just it goes from there. So, but it all starts with SRY. So what does this do? What is SRY doing? So it's turning on genes in this thing called the bipotential gonad. So when you were a little baby fetus inside your mother's womb, you were neither really male nor really female. You probably had a certain chromosome arrangement, so there was that, but you didn't start to differentiate until I think it's about 2 months into development, maybe about 6 weeks. So these genes get turned on if you have a Y chromosome. So you have SRY that starts to turn on testicular genes, and it takes these bipotential gonads and turns them into testes. So SRY drives them and turns them into testes, and then the testes descend, go into the scrotum, and then they start to release testosterone to masculinize the rest of the fetus. Now, if you don't have SRY, so let's say you have an XX, or let's say you have 1X, that does happen. You end up with ovaries. So the bipotential gonads, their default program is to be female. So they will end up turning into ovaries, and the different parts that would be male dissolve, and the different parts that are female stay behind. And then the ovaries don't descend, they stay up inside the body, right? So that's how it happens. And SRY is really the key. And that is one gene of only a handful of genes that's found on the Y chromosome. And that's how you get males and females based on chromosomal sex to gonadal sex. Lovely. Now, what's happening then? Why is this so important to get testes and turning them into, having an effect on boys? And why do we see certain sex differences between boys and girls? So this is because when you have an SRY gene, this is turning the bipotential gonads into testes, which then start to produce a ton of testosterone. And a little fetus will be producing as much hormone, as much testosterone as you might see at peak puberty, which is pretty amazing. So almost as much as a teenager. So tons of testosterone surging through male fetus. And it is doing all kinds of things to the body. It's turning the clitoris into a penis. It is masculizing certain features of the face and other things, how things grow. But it's also having a huge effect on the brain. And so that's one thing I'm going to talk about today. So it has a huge effect on certain aspects of the brain. We know that in post-birth, back when the testosterone finally went down to very undetectable levels, all the way up until puberty, there's no hormones really involved. Both males and females have no hormones. And females, they have no hormones at all, right? Not even through birth. So there's no estrogen circulating. There's no testosterone circulating. And so what this means is that it's testosterone that shaped the boy's brain when they were in utero, has an effect on certain behaviors that we see in kids. So certain sex differences in social play. So boys generally will engage in roughhouse behavior. They tend to draw differently than girls. And then certain cognitive tasks tend to be different. But of course, there are exceptions to that rule. You're going to find plenty of girls who will want to engage in roughhouse play, and you will find plenty of boys who don't want to engage in roughhouse play and are a little bit more gentle. It's something that happens. Those are exceptions to the rules. It's just how biology is, and biology is messy. Then once you hit puberty, now both males and females have surges in their sex hormones. Males have lots of testosterone. That's the blue line, and females have estrogen that goes up and down depending upon their menstrual cycle, right? And then that's going to be activating certain sex-specific behaviors for mating. Boys turning into men and girls turning into women get very interested in sex and want to engage in sex, right? And that's largely driven by hormones. And then you also have the addition of secondary sex characteristics. So estrogen continues to feminize women and causes the breasts to get larger and certain changes in the hips. And then men, of course, their voice gets deeper and they start to make hair in weird places, and they start to smell. So lovely stuff. So, but that's how we get then men and women over a long period of time, and why we see certain differences in the brain. But of course, keeping in mind it's biology, and biology is messy, and there are exceptions to the rule. So men and women aren't the only males and females in the animal kingdom. There are other animals that are males and females. An animal I'm particularly familiar with is the songbird. So when I did my PhD, I worked with songbirds. And songbirds are cool. They have a lot of interesting things going on for them, including in the brain. So songbirds, they sing. That's why they're called songbirds, right? And one thing about their brains is that they have a series of brain areas that regulate singing behavior. And the other cool thing is that in most songbird species, you have just the male that sings and the female does not. So you have a big sex difference in the brain. A huge sex difference. And here's an example of this. So this is just showing one brain area. This is an area called RA. And in males, it's much bigger than it is in females. So this is what it looks like in females. It's much bigger in males. And this is an example from zebra finches. So this is a male zebra finch. You can see the male zebra finch has this big old orange cheek patch, and he's got the black and white stripes and the black stripe across his chest. And the female is very gray, does not have the orange cheek patches, and she also doesn't sing. Hence, her song control system tends to be pretty small. So some of these sex differences and behaviors clearly are being driven by differences in the brain. So, and that's some of the stuff that I had studied. That's where my interest in this topic comes from. But this is the thing. Biology is messy, and you can find exceptions to the rule, including songbirds. And there's a really cool example from songbirds. I'm going to skip ahead. This is a picture of one bird that came from a study that was published in a very high-profile journal. An entire study focused on a single bird. This one bird was a gynandromorph. So gyno means guy, or gyno means like woman, you know, the gynecologist. And andro means men. So this is a blending of man and woman. And these birds that are gynandromorphs, they are male on one side. You can see he's got the orange cheek patch here. And he has a female side, no orange cheek patch on her left side. And you can see even the black striping in the feathers stops right in the midline. It's like right down the middle, almost like very Victor Victoria type thing, just completely split down the middle. This is a picture of the bird's right side. You can see, looks just like a male, orange cheek patch. You got the black and white striping. And on the other side, female. Crazy. So this is a gynandromorph. When you look at the gonads, it had a testis on the right side and an ovary on the left side. So something about the chromosomal arrangement in this bird is a little bit different than what we normally think. When you look in the brain, you can see this from the get-go. So there are ways of staining the different sex chromosomes. And in birds, their sex chromosome arrangement is a little bit different than it is in males. In mammals. So mammals, we have the heterogametic sex is men. They have an XY. Hetero meaning two kinds, like one and the other. And then homogametic means that they have two chromosomes of the same kind, and those are the females. In birds, the heterogametic sex is females, and the homogametic sex is males. So they're the opposite of what mammals are. So this bird's right side, remember, this is male, and this bird on the right side has Z chromosomes on the right side of its brain. So this is a picture of the brain. Okay, so this is a slice of the brain, and these guys, they labeled all the cells in the brain that all have Z, or they all have W. So in birds, because XY is different, they decided to go one letter up and one letter down, so they use ZW to designate the sex chromosomes, because it's opposite than it is in mammals. Scientists love to make things complicated because biology is complicated. So you're just gonna have to bear with me. So this is cool. These are pictures of brain slices from this bird. So, and then you can see in this one bird, both sides have a Z, as you would expect, because Z is found in both males and females, but only one side has W chromosomes. And that is the left side, the female side. The male side does not. So already there's some weirdness going on, right? We can look at song system areas because there are big sex differences. So that's one really cool thing about this bird, is that this might be a great way of seeing, is hormones more important? Is genetics more important? Or is it something in between? And it turns out it's complicated because it's biology, and you're going to find exceptions even within this one bird. So one of these brain areas, called HVC, is shown here. So this is a very important brain nucleus, and on the right side of this bird's brain, the male side, it's much bigger than it is on the left side. And they plotted that here. So this big black dot is this one bird, and then they had a bunch of other brains from other birds that they looked at. Both these are males, and then these are females, and they were just looking at the differences across the brain. And you can see this one bird was very big, much bigger on the right side than it was on the left side. But then you looked at other song system nuclei. Remember, I showed you RA before and how much bigger it is in males than females. This bird's RA really wasn't that different on the left side and the right side. So it was mostly basically the same, no sex difference for this brain area. But this brain area was much more male on the male side than it was on the female side. Important, right? So if we move on, so that's birds, right? And you might be thinking, well, birds are weirdos and who cares? We can look at mammals. Mammals don't quite have the significant degree of sex differences. There are quite a few, but they're not nearly as robust as they are in the song control system. That's a pretty extraordinary example, and one reason why they're interesting to study, because it's so different. But you will find differences between male and female brains when you talk about mammals. And here's an example. So this is a figure taken from a paper published by Robert Gorski from a very long time ago, 1978. Title of this paper is Evidence for a Morphological Sex Difference Within the Medial Preoptic Area of the Rat Brain. And so this is a great paper, and it's a paper that really was the first one to define a major sex difference in mammals in the brain. What he found is that when he was looking through the really base of the brain, which, a lot of people, they say, oh, the lizard part of the brain. This is kind of what they mean. They're talking about this part of the brain. It's called the hypothalamus. And it's really at the bottom of the brain, and it does a lot of very basic, important things for the body. It regulates feeding. It regulates sleep. It regulates fear. It regulates stress. It regulates sex. And so what we're going to talk about here is a sex-related area. So this area of the brain is really important for regulating sexual reproduction and sexual desire in mammals. And so in males, this part of this area, called the preoptic area, is much bigger than it is in females. So this, you can see like this dark area, this is what we're looking at here. It's not nearly as big as it is over here in the males. You can see it's much bigger in males than it is in females. And so Robert Gorski and his colleagues called this the sexually dimorphic nucleus of the preoptic area. Sexually dimorphic means two different kinds across sexes. They also did a few experiments to see how does this work. And they found some really cool, interesting results from this. So one thing that they did is they gave pregnant rats testosterone. And so they injected the pregnant rats with a whole bunch of testosterone, a lot more than the fetuses would normally see. So the testosterone got up into the brains of all the fetuses. And one thing they found is that for the female babies, once they were adults, their SDNPOAs were male-like. They were much bigger than they were in intact females. You can see right here, much smaller than these females here that got testosterone. It looks very much like a regular male. And so the opposite side of this, so adding in testosterone makes females look like males. And if you gonadectomize very young males, so you take the testes out of a brand new born baby rat, you you will turn the SDNPOA into a female-like SDNPOA. So you can see this SDNPOA is much smaller than the males, and it looks very female-like. So testosterone is necessary and sufficient for turning the sexually dimorphic nucleus of the preoptic area into a male-like preoptic area. Skipping ahead here. So it turns out that there's a sensitive period in which this happens, and it's during this pre and postnatal development period. So it's right when the testes start to circulate, and when the testes start to secrete testosterone, all the way past birth. So PN means postnatal day 0, all the way up to postnatal day 10. And so during this sensitive period, this is when testosterone would be acting on the male brain to turn it into a male. Or if you give females testosterone, it has to be during this period, right? So this is the sensitive period in which this happens. So this ends up organizing the brain to turn it either male or female. This is going to have an impact on their brains when they are adults. So let's skip this part. We're going to ignore this part because it's a little complicated. I'm just going to talk about the end result here. So the end result is that we have an impact on adult behavior. So this is a picture of the way rats get it on. So this is a male. The black mouse rat here is mounting this female rat who is doing lordosis. So a female rat will arch her back and raise up her hindquarters so that the male can do his thing. And that's reproduction in rats. Beautiful. Nature's just so beautiful. So, interestingly, when you have rats that have undergone these different combinations of testosterone or castration, it ends up changing their sexual behavior an awful lot. So males that are normal, they are not castrated, they have a normal surge in testosterone, they will generally mount females, right? So this is a genetic male. He had testosterone during development, and here he is mounting a female right here. Now a genetic male, genetic sex, right? So this guy would be XY, who is castrated early on in development during the sensitive period here. He would end up actually acting a lot more like a female. So he would end up, as an adult, doing lordosis behavior, sticking his hind end up. Now, he has a penis. He doesn't have a vagina, but he will be doing female-like behaviors. He will be sticking his hind end up and allowing males to mount him. So he's either preferring the company of males, so he is homosexual in his orientation, but perhaps he is even identifying as a female. And we don't know that. We can't answer that question because you can't ask a rat, are you male or female? If we look at his genetic sex, he's XY. If he is, if we look at his penis, he has his genitalia, he's got a penis, right? So both of those things, Ben would say, boom, biology says you're a male, so you're a male. I don't care that you're a rat that is acting like a female. But this is the thing. And we know that development can be messy and that certain things can happen in development that's kind of out of the control of just about everyone. And it could end up having an effect on the brain that would be changing these brain circuits so that the preferred gender or orientation of the person is going to be different than whatever chromosomes they have. It's going to be different than whatever genitalia they have that we typically would associate with those preferences. The same is true for females. So we can talk about a female that's genetically female. So this is from rats that are XX. A typical female rat that was not exposed to testosterone early on, she will show lordosis as an adult. But a female rat that was exposed to testosterone during development, she will act like a male as an adult. But the interesting thing here is that she's much more likely to act like a male if you give her testosterone as an adult. So she will show mounting behavior as long as you give her testosterone as an adult, sort of like the hormone treatment therapies that transgender people get, right? It's the same thing. So, but her brain was organized early on in development and probably changed these important brain circuits that's really important for the basic things that our brains do, and probably altering either preference, sexual preference, or even identity in these animals. And it's very likely that something similar is happening in humans. So let's see, skipping ahead here. I want to talk about a couple of examples, some exceptions to the rule here. Let me check. Got some playbacks, cool. So there are exceptions to these rules in humans, and there's some really interesting examples that we can learn about how messy biology is. So there are some people who get diagnosed with something called complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. So these individuals are genetic males, right? Every single cell in their body has XY chromosome arrangement. But the thing that's interesting about these individuals is that they have a mutation in the androgen receptor. So androgens are, testosterone is an androgen. And testosterone, as a chemical, the testes, they make testosterone and then they float around the body. And in order for them to do anything in the cell that is going to be sensitive to the testosterone, it has to talk to a receptor. And so it's like a lock and key mechanism. It comes in, locks into the keys, the key goes into the lock, which is the testosterone going into the androgen receptor. And then that will induce the change in the cell, which will then masculinize it. Now, if you have a mutation in the androgen receptor, you will end up with an individual who will have testes, because you have an XY chromosome, right? So the Y chromosome is there, which means an SRY is there, which means the bipotential gonad was turned into testes. You had Captain America and Iron Man in there fighting off all the ovarian genes and pushing forward the testicular genes. So now you have testes. They're pumping out all kinds of testosterone in development, but the testosterone isn't doing anything. It's not acting on the rest of the body to masculinize it, because these individuals have no androgen receptor. They're completely blind to testosterone. And so these individuals, they have testes, but they look phenotypically female, and they identify as female usually. The testes usually stay up inside the body, and they have no ovaries, right? Because the gonad was turned into testes. They have XY chromosome arrangement. Yet they have a vagina. They have no penis, because the testes would convert the genitalia from being female-like into male-like. But because there's no androgen receptor, none of that happens. They end up with a vagina. Interestingly, these individuals, they usually don't even know that they have this problem until they hit puberty. So they will get up into their, 13, 14, 15, and they won't have, they will be missing their period. All of a sudden, they're not getting a period. And this is obviously of concern to them and their parents. So they go in to the doctor and try to figure out what's going on. And lo and behold, they will find out at the age of 14 or 15 years old that they are genetically male, that they have testes, that their bodies are surging with testosterone. They have tons of testosterone, but it's not doing anything because they're missing an androgen receptor. They will never have children. This is a huge shock. They have a vagina, but no uterus. Crazy. The other cool thing about these individuals that have androgen insensitivity syndrome, because their hormones are largely muted in their bodies, they have a very low percentage of body fat. They have no body odor, like none whatsoever. They actually shower at a very low rate. They could miss showers for weeks and no one would know. They get no secondary hair growth, so they have no hair growing in their armpits. No, I don't know about the pubic hair actually, but armpits and the face, none of that. They also have no acne. They have like really great skin. So there's some kind of benefits to this. So, and these individuals, they identify as not men or women necessarily. There's a category here called intersex. So these people, they have XY chromosome arrangement. So they're genetically male. They have testes. So gonadally, they're male, but their genitalia is female, and they feel female because the testosterone didn't change their brains early on in development. It didn't make them to want to be more male-like. And it also even more interesting is that at puberty, they will often develop breasts and hips at puberty, and that's especially true if they are intact. So one thing that's been a big issue for people with complete androgen insensitivity syndrome is that for a long time, doctors would find kids that have these issues